All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Michelle Ragland and I'm the Manager of Member Services and Events here at ACCSC. Before we get started with our webinar, we have just a few housekeeping items. So all of you are in listen-only mode. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button in our webinar platform. We'll be monitoring those and we'll have them ready for our presenter. There's also a chat box to enter answers to our presenters' questions. So if you have a question yourself, try to keep it to the Q&A one. We'll be able to see that faster. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on our website within the next few days. If you're attending live right now, you'll receive documentation of attendance following the webinar. And for those of you who are watching our recording, you'll be able to download a certificate from our website. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Welding Words and Measuring Meaning, General Education with Purpose. We're joined by Christine Douglas, General Education Program Director at Universal Technical Institute in Canton, Michigan, where she focuses on creating engaging and effective learning experiences for students. Christine is passionate about fostering meaningful connections and practical learning and enjoys helping others develop skills that make a real impact both in and out of the classroom. And we're absolutely delighted to have her join us today. Christine, thank you again so much for being here. How are you?
I am good, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you. So, with that wonderful introduction you heard, my name is Christine Douglas. I'm the Program Director of General Education at Universal Technical Institute in Canton. Today, I am going to talk to you about something that's near and dear to my heart, and I hope you see my passion and can take something from this webinar after we're all done. But I will focus a bit on defining general education skills. So in general, what are these and what can we do with them, right? The reasons we need general education skills, why they're important, how general education increases employability. So we're going to focus a little bit on what our employers are looking for, what they want from us and what they need. Some tips and tricks that you can take with you into kind of incorporating these general education and soft skills as a part of your curriculum and even in your classroom that you have today. And then in reality, just making general education worthwhile for your career-focused student. How do you do that? How do you put that into the classroom? With that, I want to tell you a little bit about my background and who I am, and really why you should listen to me. I'd want to know who's talking to me and telling me about this. So it's important to know a little bit about how I got where I am today and who I am. So I received a bachelor's and master's in communication from Eastern Michigan University years and years ago. And I originally went to school to be a secondary education teacher. I thought this was for sure. I wanted to teach high school. I knew what I wanted to do. That didn't happen. I didn't end up teaching secondary education. And in fact, I went on to get that master's degree in communication, and my parents were beyond supportive. But the one thing they asked me when I was done with that degree was, now what? What are you going to do with a communication degree? And to be fair, I didn't really have an answer to their question, but I did go on to work in human resources. I practiced many of the skills that we're talking about today in terms of these general education and soft skills, and I put them into practice. I used them on a day-to-day basis. Believe it or not, I knew I still wanted to teach, so I ended up doing a lot of the corporate training, a lot of the training elements within this organization's network and place of employment. And I did a lot of interviewing of technicians. So I got to see what they had to offer in terms of their technical ability and in terms of their soft skills. I am a firm believer that education never ends. We're constantly learning, we're constantly growing, and that kind of showcases in my own background. I then went back to school again because I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do more, I'm gonna learn more, I'm gonna figure out exactly where my path should be. And I got a graduate certificate in leadership from Davenport University. And even now I'm back in school again for a degree in course design and technology. And that just goes to show that in education, it never ends. I'm also a firm believer that Our education uh, really stems from more than just a college degree. It stems more from the classes that we take and the training that we have. In reality, we learn a lot from our home life and we learn a lot from the jobs that we have. And in this picture here, it's kind of comical, right? I have my youngest child pictured first, and he wants to be a teacher when he grows up. His joy is school. I never have to ask him to go to school. He's like one of those kids that just wakes up and is like, I want to go to school. That's what I want to do. He invited me in at the end of last year to watch a lesson that he was teaching in the classroom. This was optional, and he chose to do it. And in the other picture, he dressed up for Halloween last year as his favorite teacher. He's sure. He knows what he wants to do. He knows his why. He knows his purpose. On the other hand, I have my oldest son, Joshua, and he has been the biggest teacher to me. Um, and I've learned more from him than I think from any of my college education classes. You would think this picture was staged, but it actually fell into my lap a few weeks ago when I sent him upstairs to finish his homework, and he's in middle school now, so he gets quite a bit of it. And I walked into his room and I found him like this. His head was on the desk, just like you see. And I said, what are you doing? You're supposed to be doing your homework. What are you working on? Like, what's the problem? What's going on? And he looks at me and he said, I'm doing ELA, which is English, and I've been told that I have to write an essay. Why am I doing this? This makes no sense. When in my real job one day, Mom, am I ever going to have to write an essay on community, which is the topic he was given? In reality, I could sit here and say, yeah, your future boss is going to tell you to write an essay on community. But that isn't the case. He's not going to be told that he has to write that essay in community. But what he is going to have to do, he's going to have to use the skills that are put forth in that essay in various ways. It took me explaining to him his why. Why is he doing this? Will you have to find evidence to support a claim that you make one day? Yeah, you will. Will you have to use critical thinking skills? You betcha. Will you have to be able to write your words on paper or on a computer screen in a way that people can read them and understand them? Of course you will. That's just what happens, right? So his teacher may not have explained the why, but the skills he's learning in that general education course will help him along the way. And as I mentioned, my family teaches me things, and my husband's no different. He is a prime example of what I'm talking about today. This first picture you see, and I apologize for the quality of the photo. I am not by trade any kind of photo editor. I couldn't get the line out of it, although I really tried. He here is showing these lighted Christmas decor items, if you will. And during a family gathering, his sister was like, man, I really wanted these things to work. And here we are at the holiday gathering, and my Christmas lights stopped working. This is ridiculous. He's always been a person that is technical, has the ability to fix anything. He went out to the garage during the family gathering while we were opening presents and decided to fix said lights. He knew his purpose. He knew his why. He wanted to make his sister happy. He wanted to create these lights for her. He knew that, but that wasn't always the case for him. He was the student whose parents told him upon graduating high school that your choice is to go to school. There was no other choice. You're going to go to a university and you're going to get a degree. Well, he went to 3 of them in 3 different programs, and he didn't finish any of them. Now, there's a positive to this. He eventually found a technical program that fit him. He could understand the purpose of his classes there. When he originally started and didn't finish any of those programs before, he didn't understand why he was taking the classes he was taking. He didn't understand how those classes would correlate to future success, to his ability to get a job. His technical program gave him that. It gave him the focus of, hey, here's the skills you're going to use. We're going to show you how you use them. That being said, he decided to pair his technical program with an associate's degree. And I would like to take credit, as we were married when this happened, for him going out there and getting that, associate's degree and taking those general ed classes. That idea didn't come from me. It came from a really smart advisor who he listened to at that college, and he took the classes. Now I have to have a happy ending to the story. So the picture on the other side of the screen shows him at his current place of employment. He now puts on various car shows throughout the United States. And this one here is at the Detroit Autorama, which is a big one where we're at. It's the one that I get to see him do his handiwork. And he uses a lot of the technical skills that he learned from his courses, but he also uses a lot of those soft skills. And when I was putting this presentation together, I actually asked him, I said, hey, what got you the job that you have now? And he said, well, that's easy. My technical degree got me this job. But he said, hold up. What's kept me in the job, what's allowed me to be promoted in my job, what's allowed me to excel and do what I do are the soft skills. He's like, I negotiate with people all the time. You know how this goes, right? When you're at a big event, things don't always go right. You have to adapt, roll with it, use critical thinking skills to fix it. Although he still uses those technical skills, those general education components, those soft skills play a huge role in what he does on a day-to-day basis. I am a pretty lucky individual myself, and I get to help people find their why and their purpose and understand why they're learning these soft skills. And what's interesting to me is I work at a conference in the summertime. I go for just a couple days and I get to interact with some amazing trade students and instructors. And they always like to try to trip me up. It's kind of funny. They always say, this past summer, one of my students was like, hey, Christine, what's one tool in my tool bag as a plumber that I use the most? And they know I'm not going to know the answer. So they think this is like really funny. And they're like, it's not a plunger. That's your hint. If anybody knows, you can feel free to type in the chat. But I learned that it's a pipe wrench. I didn't know that. That's the tool they use out of their tool bag the most, right? Another student said, hey, I bet you don't know what an HVAC technician uses the most, what tool they pull out of their tool bag the most. I didn't know. And they were really excited that I didn't know. And they were like, it's a multimeter. That's the one I use the most. That's it, Christine. That's the tool. And I said, well, wait, now it's my turn. What is the one tool that all of you use every day that is not found in a tool bag? It's communication. They didn't like how I related that right back to what we were there to learn, but they definitely got over it and they said, okay, we get the importance of this, right? So the most beneficial tools sometimes aren't found in a tool bag. We have what's called the checklist mindset, and this is something that's huge. I see it with my children, I see it with my students, and believe it or not, I see it sometimes with educators. And it's this checklist mindset of general education components and requirements as just get them over with, right? We have the box, we're checking it, we're just getting it over with. They're often seen as unrelated to trade or career-based institutions or skills. And that's not the case, and we're going to talk about that. And they're often undervalued by students, and I would even argue sometimes they're undervalued by educators too. Sometimes we don't look at the focus of what they have. But in reality, these general education classes offer transferable skills. And this is what I continue to stress. And you've heard me talk about the element of communication, but there's lots of different things that these general education components, these soft skills, teach our students. Of course, first and foremost, we have communication. There's not a job out there that you don't have to communicate in some way, somehow, doing something within your job. You're always doing it. Critical thinking, being able to solve an issue, being able to think about something. My husband's job is a prime example of this. He went into a technical trade and now he uses more critical thinking skills. He works with all different trades. He's able to think through, well, if one person gets this, how do we handle this situation? How do we make it work for everyone? Collaboration, being able to talk to people, to engage, what we're doing right now, right? We're coming together, we're collaborating. We have to teach our students to be able to do this too. There's also the idea of adaptability. As much as we want things to stay the same, and I'm a person that wants that sometimes, right? You get something you like, you think things are going really well, we have to be willing to change. And that adaptability, that being able to kind of roll with the punches sometimes, is what's needed in the workplace. And not all students have that. And that's a skill set that can be taught in the classroom, both a gen ed classroom and a trade classroom, a career focused classroom, to allow them to be able to use that skill in the workplace. We also have the idea of emotional intelligence, and this is one that's absolutely huge. I see this all the time in my own kids and my students. I teach a lot of Gen Z students, so I really see this as a problem. They've held their phones here for far too long, right? But the idea of knowing when it's appropriate to comment on something, being able to read the room, that simple idea of going, well, maybe I shouldn't say that right now. Maybe it's not the best idea to talk about that. But sometimes those are skills that aren't just known, but they have to be practiced. And that becomes especially important in the workplace. So we have to think about, how our students are always asking, what tool do I use? Or what do I use for this component? Because we are teaching towards that career-based idea, right? But there's a lot of tools that are used that aren't in that tool bag, and that's what general education focuses on. There's the idea of communication, which I've continued to harp on. You're like, Christine, we know we're supposed to communicate, but that can be seen in many different ways. It doesn't mean you're writing a paper on the elements of communication. It also means client interactions. It means teamwork. It means being able to work in groups in the classroom, because we know that they're not just going to go to their workplace, sit in a cubicle or sit in a room and just do it, or they're not just going to go out to a job site and only be by themselves all the time. There's going to be times where they have to work in that group. Math, that's huge. I mean, I can't tell you how many times my own students are like, oh, great, intermediate algebra. That sounds like fun. I get it. But in reality, we can still teach to our learning outcomes. We can still make sure that we're measuring success of our students and we're teaching them the outcomes we're supposed to teach. But there's nothing that says we can't make it relatable to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. For example, again, with my husband's job, I told you that now he's doing car shows. He does blueprints all the time. He uses measurements. It's actually funny. My son was learning fractions the other day and he goes, I am never going to use fractions in my life. When am I going to use this? This is silly. Cue my husband, who got really excited at that moment and brought in a tape measure. It's like, whoa, we really are using measurements. Really are using fractions, right? We really are using these things and we need to know. Critical thinking. In my own world, my own technical students are really good at troubleshooting. A lot of them are excellent at it, and they're excellent at problem solving. We can take that even a step further. Being able to share how they knew what the issue was. Collaboration, project management, safety coordination, talking to other people in the field. Being able to use technology and being adaptable to things that change. My goodness, I can't tell you how many different pieces of technology I've used in my own life. It's kind of comical. Um, when I was born, it wasn't an age of computers, and I still remember when Google came about and I had to try to figure out a Google Drive, and I was like starring every one of my documents. We have to learn new tools all the time. So we have to teach our students to be able to roll with it too, right? To be more adaptable and to be able to kind of change with the times. Professional writing. Writing is a general education skill set. It doesn't mean that your students have to sit down and write those 5-paragraph essays. I shared that story with my son and how he was like, the community essay, when am I going to do this? But it does mean that we can still measure the learning outcomes we have in our class by having them do things that they're going to do in their own line of work, whatever that might look like for what you're teaching. Then there's also the idea of ethics and responsibility. One of the really cool things that another instructor shared with me is they take real world examples, things that are going on in companies that their students might work at eventually or eventually kind of have interactions with. And they talk about maybe things that have made the news, things that are going on. They talk about what's happening. How would people respond? Would you do anything differently? And sometimes just the idea of talking about something and putting everything you're teaching into a big picture for students allows them to see why it's applicable to them. They know their why, they know the reasons why this is important. We also have to think about what our employers want, right? So and I work at a place that is really, really good at this, and I'm going to toot my own place of employment's horn here because I've never seen a place take feedback so well and roll with it because we do. It can be hard to hear that maybe something's not working, or maybe that there needs to be tweaks and changes, right? So one of the things we have to listen to are our employers. And I told you at the beginning of this that I said, hey, I worked in human resources for years because I did. I was hiring, I was interviewing. And one of the things that every manager told me when I initially did the first interview for them to kind of get that employee or hopefully that future employee to the next stage of the process was they said, look for good technical skills, but I also need them to be able to talk to people. I have to have them work with so and so. They're going to be able to have to fit in with this crew. There were things that they wanted, right? So there were things that they were looking for. They said, we can teach them a lot. We'd really like them to be relatable. Our customers seem to really like that. So listening to what your employers are saying, if you're sitting in PAC meetings, having them come out and say, hey, you have a great program. And I've heard this time and time again, your students are prepared. They have a great set of skills. You're doing something right. But I've also heard, we'd really like them to be able to talk a little bit better, or hey, I'd like them to be able to, have a few more of those soft skills to where they're able to, communicate what's happening there and not just be able to fix it. Those are also important. So it's important that we kind of take that feedback and do what we can to make changes as necessary. So what does this look like? And this is kind of a pretty slide here that talks a little bit about the different things that we can do. Now, at your institution, it may look different, but there's a couple different ways to make sure that general education is embedded into what you're teaching. You can either have separate general education courses that students have the opportunity to take. I'm really fortunate. I work at a place that has them. They offer a really great program, a degree program that students are able to get these general education courses done. You also can embed general education outcomes into your classes. And it doesn't have to be an either or approach as well. So again, at my own place of employment, we're able to do a little bit of both, right? We offer those general education courses, but we also embed some of these important elements into our classes because we're finding that it works. It works to be able to increase engagement, and it works for our students to kind of have these skills when they leave us and they go out and leave the nest, right? One thing you can do at your own institution is create learning communities. And this is kind of a fancy word for committees. So if you have this committee in your own workplace, and maybe you get together and talk about how you can switch things up in the classroom, how you can engage your students, what you can do to encourage these soft skills or to have them present more, to talk more, to communicate more. There's also contextualized learning, which just means, hey, creating assignments with application to real life scenarios. Most of us probably have instructors that have worked in the field. They've been out there, they've been a part of things. And one of the best things we can do if we've been in the field is to bring that into the classroom. These are things you're going to see. How would you respond to it? What would happen? If Jimmy's climbing that ladder and he's not doing it correctly, what do you do? Do you say, oh, leave it to Jimmy, and you walk away? Or do you say something? Do you go get a safety coordinator? These are ethical dilemmas, things that you can talk about, things that you're going to see on the site. And people relate to stories. They relate to common ground. Oh, wow, you saw that on the job? That's really interesting. What happened? Knowing that you can provide that to your students only prepares them better for the future. You also can do program mapping. This does take a little bit more time. You could embed these outcomes into all of your classes, make sure there's a uniform approach. Again, that's going to take a bit more time. It's not for everyone, but it's an option and something you could do. There's also the idea of interdisciplinary projects. Now, the first thing that came to my mind when I was putting this together was like, yeah, like STEM, right, Christine? Yeah, like STEM projects, like the K through 12 STEM. We're thinking about more than that. And I'm not saying that I'm making, our aviation students learn HVAC. It's not that at all. What I am saying is that we can incorporate different things into the classroom. Maybe it's a project where students build a robot while documenting the process in a step-by-step guide. And instead of just writing down those notes, they then turn around and have to have another student build the robot using the directions they created. Or maybe they have to present how they went through and did what they did. So in turn, we're creating the idea of these general education concepts, these soft skills being put into the classroom in various ways. So great, right? I've talked about all these things and you're like, Christine, but what does it look like? What does it look like to me and what can I do? And that's my goal for you. I want you to figure out what this looks like for you. And it's not going to be the same for every single person here, and that's okay. It's not supposed to be. So in my world, we have general education classrooms, and some of you might offer specific general education courses. In this case, it can look a little different. So you have a list of learning outcomes that you're looking at. And remember, we're never changing those outcomes. We're simply changing what we have our students do to kind of measure those outcomes. So in an English course, you have to somehow relate this back to what they do. So maybe you're having your students write a client proposal or a project summary of a job they were on. You're still practicing those skills, but you're relating it specifically to what they will do in the future. And again, this is going to be dependent on what your school is teaching, what your courses are teaching. In math, this is huge. They have to know the why. Why am I doing intermediate algebra? I don't know that there's much excitement when people, sign up for it, right? They're like, well, great, more math. You're going to have to calculate materials. So why not build that into the class? Make it a story problem where they're doing something that would be related to that job experience that they would then have. Organizational communication. Being able to think about who they're interacting with. What might be occurring? How do they communicate with those above them? And the biggest one here is sociology. There's often this like stigma that it's not going to relate to what's happening. But in reality, workplace culture is huge. And that's a large part of sociology. So you can easily take concepts of that and relate it to, hey, here's what's going on. One thing we've done in our classes here, which has really worked well, is we've integrated workplaces that our students are going to. So I'll often take a look at some of the places that our students are being hired at, and I'll try to take in some of the ideas and stories or information about culture from those organizations and have them talk about it. All of a sudden, the students are relating to things a little bit more. It makes more sense because it's relatable to them. They know their why. Like my son who didn't get it, right? He didn't understand the connection. We're making that connection for them. Ethics can be easily integrated in a lot of general education and trade classrooms, kind of again, the real world dilemmas and the real world scenarios. So what does this look like? So for those of you that have a trade specific classroom, whatever it is that you're teaching, maybe you don't have a specific set of general education courses that you have. It doesn't mean that you have to rebuild a program now and you have to add these gen ed classes. Not at all. In fact, you can integrate soft skill components and general education components into your classroom, into your lessons, and into your ideas. Creating a time where they have to write, whether it's a customer service journal, bringing in weekly reflections on professionalism or things that might be happening. Talking about workplace scenarios. Again, our instructors have had so much experience in the field talking about these scenarios that are going to happen in the workplace and having them think through that process of what it might mean. That's huge. In my own line and place of employment, I hear all the time about our instructors bringing in people from the field. It's a great way to make things applicable. I love it. I think it creates that connection between the two worlds, right? Another thing you can do to add to this is create something like a career interview project, where maybe you're interviewing an industry professional and you're not just talking about, again, those tools that you're pulling from the tool bag. You're also talking about the other types of skills that are used in the workplace, the other things that might be brought in and how they're used and applied. Maybe you think about a capstone presentation or a presentation at the end where you're combining technical skills with an informative communication presentation, right? They're talking about what they learned, or here's what I found, here's how this applies. So you're creating the application. It's not just here's the book, here's the definition, I'm going to write it down. We're instead thinking about all of that because those definitions are still important, but how do we apply them? And what do we do to make sure that they're getting those great technical skills, which we're already doing, and just adding in those soft skill components to make sure that they can then share those ideas. In fact, some of your students might have oral tests that they have to take before they go into their field. This helps to prepare them. When they have to talk out loud and present and get in front of people and be able to think on the spot as to what might be happening, that's only going to make them better prepared for the future. It's going to help them in an interview process, not just the workplace. So what does this look like? And I apologize, there are way too many words on this slide, and I normally wouldn't do this, but I wanted you to see an example of a presentation. And I will tell you, I thought it was important to share my background and where I've come from because I started in higher ed. I taught in higher ed for a long time. And I didn't really struggle with this until I kind of came into more of a career-based curriculum and format. And students never asked their why before. So I was in this, classroom and students just sort of did it. They figured it out. So when I came in and I was making a demonstration speech assignment, this isn't our exact assignment, but it gives you an idea of what might be there, right? So this is an example demonstration speech assignment that someone might do in a basic public speaking class, right? 3 to 5 minute speech. You're asking them to demonstrate how to do something. Make sure you have a clear introduction, body points, a conclusion, your basic demonstration speech. It would measure a basic learning outcome in an introductory public speaking class. When I first started, I had quite a few emails, and they started with, Christine, I get what you're going for here. I don't get it. How does this apply to me? What do you want me to do? I don't do this. This isn't my thing. I didn't like these classes in high school, and I don't like them now. Ouch, right? I'm getting those emails, and I'm like, well, I thought this was really well written. Now what? What do I do? How do I fix this to make it work? And I'm a firm believer that you can take a few minutes to dwell in bad feedback because we're human, right? Even my own kids after a sporting game or an event or they try out for something and they don't make it, I'm like, take a few hours, you're going to dwell in it, but then we learn from it. and we fix it and we figure out what can we do to still measure our learning outcomes, but to incorporate soft skills. And I know you guys all are on mute, but I want you to think about this and think about what you would do to change this assignment. And I'll show you what I did here. So I made it relatable to them. So I provided examples that they could do. I still get emails on the assignment, don't get me wrong. They still ask questions and they're allowed to ask questions and that's great. But now the questions aren't on, I don't get how it applies to me. It's on other things. How do I create this introduction? What do I do? But here's some example topics in terms of how to change a tire. I can change a tire now, let me tell you. My students have taught me a thing or two. I have a lot of aviation students who have taught me more about planes than I ever thought I would ever know. I should still not be allowed to touch a plane. But either way, they've taught me more than I thought I could ever learn in terms of aviation. It now applied to them. They have an idea of what their purpose is. They get why this is important. They get the step-by-step process and being able to think through something, to be able to tell someone else how to do it. And it doesn't end there. This one's probably the hardest one. This was another one where I got some feedback, and it's the groaning sound that each of my students probably makes originally when they enter that English class. They're not like, ooh, sign me up. They have to know the purpose. They have to know the why. This English informative narrative assignment is just an example. It's just showing you a basic one right here, right? This isn't all of the assignment, but it gives you a general idea of what students would be asked to do. Again, here, I had a ton of questions. Why am I doing this? I don't have anything to write about. You know how we were talking about writer's block, Christine? Yeah, well, I have it. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. What do you mean? And again, the feedback was there. And I took it and I dwelled in it for a few minutes. But then I ask you to think about this. What would you do to change it? How would you make this more applicable to them? And again, there's lots of approaches here. I put 2 different approaches because either one would work fine. Asking them to tell a story about a time you learned a valuable lesson about responsibility, communication, teamwork. A lot of my military students will take that approach to it. Describe a moment that changed how you viewed education, work, or relationships. A lot of them can dictate that. A lot of them talk about the moment they came to Universal Technical when they say, oh, wow, this changed my view. I once didn't like going to school. Now I love it. I get to use my hands. I'm working and I see why this is important to me. So they write about that and they tell me about their experiences. I've made it relatable to them. How does this apply to you and why are you learning it? And again, this might look different for each of you, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong way to do this, but adding those possibilities to the classroom and finding ways that they then relate to that material can only assist the student. And I apologize, this looks blurry. It doesn't look blurry on one of my screens, but it does on the other. But this is a lab example, and I'll explain it to you. What's in the lab is not quite as important as what we talk about in terms of changes within it. So you may have a career-focused class or a technical-focused class where you're asking students to do something, right? You want them to learn a skill or a specific idea. That's perfect. That's what we want from our students. And I will say this lab is very well done in the sense that it has them create it, do this in groups, and it has them write down, hey, here's what's wrong with it, and here's the corrective action. With anything, we can continue to add in those soft skills, right? So we can continue to add in components, these general education components that are only going to make that stronger. So as you're sitting here thinking, I challenge you to think about some changes that you might make to this. And there's a couple changes that I thought could be added. Again, it's done very well as it is because they are doing it in groups. You can, instead of allowing students to pick their groups, you assign them to groups. this project, this lab already has them working in groups, maybe you assign them a specific role. They have to practice being a leader in a group, telling someone what to do. That's always fun, especially when people don't want to listen, right? Maybe you give them a specific role in terms of now you're going to write down what's happening. They have to be able to write it down so people can read it. The instructor has to know that they have an understanding of the material. Maybe you have structured opportunities for students to give and receive constructive feedback. That's huge. It's one thing to get feedback from an instructor. It's another thing to get feedback from a peer. Peer feedback is hard. We need to know how to give it, and we need to know how to receive it. Especially when someone tells you, hey, you need to change that, or you need to do something differently. Not always easy to hear. Another idea is to have students explain their process and not just write it down. Maybe you have them stand up in front of the class and say why they came up with what they did. Why wasn't it this or that? Explaining and giving a background to its purpose. That peer-to-peer, that having them stand up in front of their peers and explain something is key. And it's funny, even think about it for us, right? I get up in front of a classroom all the time. I'm always talking to students. I'm always on Zoom doing something with them. But when you have to talk about something in front of your peers, it's a little bit different. Maybe you get a little more nervous than you normally would because you're just sort of used to it. You have to think about that. Your students have to get used to that too. So having them practice that skill set in the classroom is huge. So we've talked about it. Why does it matter? Why are general education courses important? Why are these soft skills important? Why does it matter to you? Why should it be important to you? That first bullet point says a lot of it. I'm lucky where I work, where we look at these types of things and we sit down and we have a committee, we have a learning community that comes together and we talk about how we can continue to improve this. And that's where the conversation starts, right? We want students to be engaged in our classroom. We want them to know why they're learning what they're learning. We want it to be applicable to their future career, and we want them to stick around. We don't want them to leave. We don't want them to not like it, to not see its purpose or its point. We want that retention. We want them to be there. And if it's not there, then we ask ourselves, what's happening? What can we do differently? And that's sometimes hard to look in the mirror and say, okay, well, what are we not doing? What can we change? But that's part of the process. That's growth, right? Education is never ending, like I mentioned. We're constantly moving forward. And if we don't, then we're not only failing us, we're failing our students, we're failing education. We also want them to be ready to enter the workplace. There's something to be said for workplace readiness, and it's not just those technical skills, right? Those employers come in and they tell us that. I was recently tasked with building a business communication course for one of the campuses. And we were talking about, things that have come up in PAC meetings and what they're saying and what they're looking for from our students. And we're trying to build that into this course to get them ready, right? We're listening to that feedback, bringing it in and going, what can we do? We want that readiness, not just in the technical skills, because they're getting that oftentimes, right? We're giving them what they need. But how do we give them those other skills too? And as I was kind of like mentioning before, faculty collaboration. When we have those learning communities, when we have those committees that get together, that's forward thinking. We're always moving and kind of trying to figure out what's best for our students. What's best for education? What's best for our institution? What can we do? And that collaboration will drive things forward. In turn, we get improved employer satisfaction. When we're listening to what our employers are telling us, they like that, right? They want our graduates when we're focused on what they need. What skill sets do we need to give them to be successful when they leave here? And we're quickly learning that it's not just technical skills that are often needed. Those are extremely important, and don't get me wrong. But they also need a set of skills that can help them keep that job, that can help them move up in a company, that can help them engage with others. And through all that, we get program credibility. Those employers keep wanting to come back. Students want to come, and it becomes something that's a known name. Oh, if you want that, you go there. They're going to give you the best. It's a lifelong impact, and it applies across the board, right? So I've kind of reiterated this idea that strong communication equals leadership potential. Now, in my just gen ed classes, I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of returning students. They've gotten jobs, and they've come back, and they wanted to get this associate's degree to kind of pair along with their career. And oftentimes I'll say, well, what made you come back? Why are you here? And they said, well, I want a management degree. Like I want to be able to like move forward, right? I want to be able to move up in my company. I want that ability to be a leader. And my workplace said, well, there's some things you need to have in place first. You need to showcase to us that you have those skills. And that's what these classes are teaching. In the same set, I also have students who, a lot of our students are using, they're very physical jobs. And they come back and say, I'm not going to be this physical forever. And I want a set of skills where I can teach others one day. I want to be able to teach them all that I know. So I'm taking these gen ed classes to help me be able to teach one day. So when I'm done being out in the field, I can teach. We have to remember that critical thinking and what we provide our students, this ability to think beyond the basics, equals innovation. And that's what's going to keep us moving forward, both in the workplace as educators. And it's going to be what keeps everything moving forward. Our students are our future, right? We want them to be the next step in this process. And we have to remember that collaboration is going to lead to better outcomes. We can't just say, okay, everybody who teaches aviation, you get in one area. Everybody who teaches gen eds, you're over in that corner of the room. We collaborate. And when we come together, like meetings like this, right, when we talk about things, when we engage with each other, all of a sudden it becomes where we're working together to incorporate these soft skills. We're working together to solve issues, to solve problems. And our students need that too. They need that level of, that ability to be able to talk to each other and say, okay, well, this didn't work. What do you think? How would you solve the issue? And that comes from putting some of this in the classroom. It's not reading a PowerPoint slide and making them do the work. Sure, they might learn something, they might hear you, but application is key. Talking, engaging. The ability to adapt, to kind of change with the times, if you will, is going to give them career longevity. Nothing stays the same. And that's what we have to remember. That's what our students have to remember. They might like things to stay the same. Heck, sometimes I'm like, things are really good right here. I want it to be just like this. It doesn't work like that. It's not always going to be the same. And we have to teach our students that that's okay. It's how we deal with it that makes the difference. We have to measure what matters. We have to listen to our students. So most of us are probably doing student evaluations where they come in and they tell us what they think about a course, about the instructor. Sometimes these are hard to hear. I'll be the first to admit I've got a few of them where I'm like, really? That's what you thought? I tried really hard on that. And just like I mentioned before, it's okay to dwell on those for a few minutes, but in my own workplace, we come from a culture that says dwell on it, sure, but let's figure out how to fix it. And that's exactly what we need to be doing, right? We need to think about this in the sense of, okay, they told us this, how do we fix it? Or it's going really well, but that doesn't mean it stops there. We can continue to improve. We have to continue to train faculty and have these meetings and have these opportunities where we talk about things, where we get together and say, okay, students aren't liking this class, or employers have come in and told us during these PAC meetings that this, and this is happening. What can we do to fix it? Again, it's not easy to hear sometimes that things need fixed, but those ideas matter, and that only strengthens our ability to fix them and to figure out how we can make it work so that our students are better prepared. There's also employer surveys asking them, you know, looking at what they want out of our students. Are they coming back to us? Career Services at my own workplace does a wonderful job with this. They're looking at what the employers need. I've been told a few things like, oh, hey, they said this, and this happened in the associate degree program, and they were really prepared. So that's good. Or they're noticing these 4 things. So listen to your employers and what they're saying. And again, it's not easy to kind of get feedback sometimes that you may not want to hear, but that can only strengthen your program and only make things better in the future. And in the end, that's what we're all looking for, right? We're looking to grow. So I ask you, after listening to my spiel and coming here today, hopefully you gained something, but reframe things. It doesn't mean you're starting from square one and you're redoing all your programs to add gen eds. You could if you want to, but in reality, you can add a lot of these components to your classrooms as they are. It could be taking a lesson plan and saying like, oh, hey, I'm going to add in some group work here. I'm going to make them get up and present here. You're only preparing them for the future from there. I ask you to reimagine, what could it be? Take the feedback you get. Think about how you can push it forward and reinvest in your own future. When we do things like this, it's an investment, not just in our faculty, not just in the college, but in our students. It's an investment of moving forward. And that's what we do in education. We're always learning. It's never ending. It's always growing. And I ask of you, as we're kind of wrapping up here today, to think about one thing that you can take with you. This is my exit ticket for today. The educator in me has to have that exit ticket, right? What's one thing that you can take with you, even if it's just that you're going to think about changing things up in your classroom and adding in some more, group components, or having them present an idea. That's something you can do. It can be small and incremental. If it's going to your employers and saying, hey, what's working? If it's asking your students what are they getting what they need? These are all things you can do. And I take you back to some of my initial slides. I take you back most of all to my husband's slide where I said, hey, what has helped you the most in your career, right? Technical skills might get you the job, and they will. No doubt about it, but soft skills will make you successful in it. It's what's going to allow you to move up the ladder. You have to be able to talk to people. And as my husband says, he uses a lot of those skills, right, in his job that we wouldn't normally think he'd be using. The technical skills are still there, but he's most definitely problem solving, project management, talking to all different kinds of trades, trying to make them all happy in a group setting, which isn't always easy. So I want to say thank you to all of you. I did leave a few minutes for questions in case there's any questions. Michelle will probably be able to lead that through the chat there. But if there's any questions, I left a few minutes there and I'm happy to take those. But thank you for listening to me about something that's near and dear to my heart, and hopefully you gained something today.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was
Oh,
wonderful. Great conversation. And I do have a few questions,
yeah.
just real quick. At your school in Michigan, how do you help the students in those programs see the value of these skills when often their focus is on mastering the technical tasks?
So that's a good question. And oftentimes, as I said, here we have a general education core. So they're taking these core classes. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are. They're taking these core classes. And within those classes themselves, I work really hard to make it relatable to them. So that's when those possible topics come in, changing some assignments. So we're still measuring learning outcomes. We're still doing what we're supposed to do, but we're doing so in a way that makes sense to them. And that's kind of where it kind of goes from there. It's up to you to figure out what makes sense for your own institution, but adding those components to make it relevant to them so you are answering that question of why.
Great. And then, thinking of our instructors, what kind of support or training do you think they need to effectively teach these skills alongside the technical instruction?
I almost think it has to be ongoing, and that's where the buy-in from administration and everyone else at the school has to be there too. There has to be this willingness to do the training, and in the same aspect, the instructors have to see the value in it. So you have to make that training worthwhile for them, otherwise they're not going to come. And it's funny, we just had this conversation in a meeting we have at work, right? How do we make it valuable for our instructors to where it's beyond a requirement, but they're then wanting to come, right? So we have to make it so much so that it's a value to them, where if we removed the requirement, they would still be there and want to take part in it. So I think it's the buy-in from everybody and kind of making sure it's a continued effort on everyone's part to get together and talk about it.
Great. Yeah, I think, this is a conversation that's just going to keep going, especially with just soft skills, just in general. And I think all of them can benefit. Christine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for
For
having me.
all of you, oh, it was great. And for all of you joining us live, I hope that you got a lot of notes. And a recording of this webinar will be on our website under training and resources in the next few days. So if you want to share it with anybody else. Some other items to keep in mind from us at ACCSC, we're looking for individuals interested in becoming a commissioner. So visit our website at accsc.org. Nominations are due by November 15th. And a new special program. Are you new to your role at an accredited school? Are you part of the team leading the school's renewal process? We have a new event coming up on January 13th and 14th, where we're going to focus on some accreditation fundamentals and help you develop a roadmap to go the distance with ACCSC accreditation. So you can visit accsc.org/events to learn more and to register. So Christine and everybody here today, on behalf of all the staff here at ACCSC, thank you all for being with us today, and we'll see you again very soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.